silile silili abafana abaje bathe nqothu into ebezibizwa ngoprofessor Kisvete abafana abancinci endithetha ngabo ndithetha into sothina small marks ndithetha ingqungqumbana nazi intshokazi ojinei bophatriyathi zithetha ngathi thina bahlobo bakaSARS sithi siyayivuma sizayithatha i-higher purpose sizayibeka i-country ibe kwilizwe eliphezulu siyabulela Ramaphosa siyabulela Nkokheli nakuzo zonke izidweshana ezidwangula ezilapha namhlanje ndithi
Thank you. Really? Wow. Deputy Minister of Finance, David Masondo, Minister of Public Enterprises, Minister PG, as you were being referred to here, Minister Pravin Gordhan, Commissioner of SARS, Professor Edward Kisveter, Auditor General of the Republic of South Africa, Ms. Tsakani Maluleke, and Deputy Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. Cuban Naidu, Chairperson of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, Mr. Joe Maswanganyi, Director General in the Presidency, Ms. Pindile Baleni, Judge Dennis Davis, Professor Michael Katz rather. I had talk about Marx and I somehow thought of Marx. Michael Katz, and the leadership and the staff of the South African Revenue Service, guests and ladies and gentlemen. She spoke about Nomazele Bala, who is passed away now. He is the one who couldn't pronounce my first name. He used to call me Silili. I met him on the mines. He used to be a gold mine worker, underground worker. And he was one of the most militant mine workers who belonged to the National Union of Mine Workers. And each time the mine management did not want to accede to various demands, be it proper food or working conditions, he would phone me in the office, and at times like 7 o'clock in the evening while I was still there, and he would say, Silili, we are closing this shaft. And he used to work at a shaft that had 18,000 workers. And he would just phone that they are closing. And I would say, why are you closing it? So that nobody goes to work. He would say, no, because they refuse to give us more meat in our food ration. And I said, Bala, is that the reason to close the shaft? He would say, yes, le shaft. I'm closing this shaft. And then he would lead the workers on strike over things like that and many more other conditions of employment. So thank you for reminding me of Nomazele Bala. It is indeed a privilege to be here and to address you on the silver jubilee of SARS. It marks 25 years of success for one of our finest state institutions. When you took us to the bridge, it felt like I was in Houston. I once went to Houston for the launching of spaceships. So I had the one privilege one time. And it is a most impressive operation as you see them press the buttons and a spaceship that goes into space takes off. And you are able to see every part of its movement. And I've often said there are two operations in the world which I think are just second to none. It's a spaceship launch in Houston, as well as Formula One motor racing, because you have no chance to make an error, to make a mistake. So thank you very much for exposing the bridge, because that just gave me that opportunity of seeing how much of a first-class organization SARS is, that we are able to see in real time what is happening. Even when you have load shedding, you monitor it so closely, and you are able to see your diesel usage throughout the country. That, South Africans, I must say, is most impressive. Even at the presidency, we don't have that. So that's impressive. So we thank you for reaching that level. But for 1 minute, I paused, because when the gentleman introduced the work that's done there, he said, when the floods happened, we were able to see everything there. When the unrest in July last year happened, we saw everything. And for a minute I paused. I thought, is it all organized here? It's most pleasing to be here with all of you. And as I look around, I see people who in many ways deal with money. And I've been trying to sniff around. I had a flu the past few days, so my sense of smell is a bit gone. So I've been trying to sniff around to feel whether there's money that's smelling here, as all of you deal with money. At the dawn of our democracy in 1994, we consolidated apartheid's governments, the Internal Revenue Customs Departments, with the Internal Revenue Customs and Departments of the former homelands. And so the South African Revenue Service was born in October 1997. And earlier in the pre-meeting, we got to hear how this came about, how the proposals came through, and the number of people who played a role, from Michael Katz doing the memorandum or doing the write-up, to Pravin Gordon, to Trevor Manuel, Vusi Chabalala, and many others, and how many of you just did the most wonderful task intellectually and organizationally of setting up SARS. Since its inception, SARS has proven and provided the democratic government with the financial resources to fulfill the promise and the mandate that we had to provide our people with freedom and to create a better life for all. That could never have been done if SARS had not come into its own to be the type of organization that it has finally become. We were fortunate at the time to have had visionaries and astute leaders who brought together different capabilities, who brought together bureaucratic structures and policies to create this most outstanding symbol of hope and what South Africa can be like. And someone was saying SARS became an exemplar, a real exemplar of what we can achieve as South Africans, in terms of it being the institution that functions so well, and that with that it became world-class. And someone was reminding us that SARS was seen and noted and recognized by all and sundry around the world as being the best tax institution in the world. And this was also recognized by none others than the Americans in the US, as they looked at the work that SARS did as it rose to the zenith of its capability. And so SARS was a truly excellent organization. And it is the SARS that you lead today, which you are rebuilding and putting back into the shape that it was, although it went through a very testing period, which I'll talk about in a little while. We welcome today all those who led SARS in its early days, bringing together these varying institutional, political, and socioeconomic outlooks characterized by the deep divisions of the past must have been one of the most significant challenges that you all who put together the SARS that we have had to face. You were essentially building a SARS from the ashes of apartheid, if that meaning, that statement can get meaning, and that is the meaning that it has, because apartheid was ashes, as it were, and bringing together the so-called homeland internal revenue services was bringing together ashes again. And out of these ashes of our past, you were able to put together an organization like this. And I want to express my gratitude to all who provided the necessary leadership to this glorious institution of our democracy. And many of you are here, and I'm so glad, Commissioner, that you were able to invite the various people who played this role. From its inception, SARS has been guided by a strong philosophical orientation of service, of a higher purpose. That's what has driven SARS to be what it has become, rather than just collecting rands and cents. And there are other many revenue institutions around the world that just collect rands and cents and all that. But you were driven by a higher purpose because you had to raise something from the ashes of our past. The institution has always understood that it is at the center of our efforts to improve the lives of society's most vulnerable. Beyond its revenue and compliance mandate, SARS was created to have a transformative impact. It had to transform this country because we needed the resources to transform the country, and therefore SARS was at the center of it all. This is thanks to the revenue collected by SARS, and you've done incredibly well throughout in terms of the amount of monies that you've collected, monies that have been put to good use to support the lives of South Africans. But during the COVID-19 pandemic, government supported businesses in distress with tax relief measures, and we all know how that was administered by SARS. SARS played a critical and central role with that. These measures were intended to prevent company closures, job losses, and to ensure that the livelihoods of workers could be safeguarded. And at a trying moment in the life of our country, SARS therefore played another critical role. None of these financial interventions that we introduced through the stimulus that we announced would have been possible were it not for the excellent work of the committed employees of SARS. Since its formation in 1997, SARS has been able to collect over 18 trillion rand for government to provide to fund various programs that have supported the lives of many South Africans. When one compares the amount of 1.6 trillion rand collected by the end of March in 2022, and you compare that to the 147 billion that SARS collected in 1996, 1997, one becomes aware and alive to the enormously impressive work that is done by SARS. Because as one of the staff members who was giving us a presentation was saying, that money that is collected does not just walk through the door on its own. It has to be collected, it has to be followed up, it has to be fetched, it has to be mobilized and brought in. And the most impressive part is the capability that you have built, using technology, using the intellectual prowess of people that you have brought together, and people who are as diverse as we all are as South Africans, to have brought them all together, men and women, young and old and middle age, to brought them all together from different races, and the beautiful diversity of our nation is clearly represented here in SARS. Having brought them together to produce this great and wonderful and outstanding capability speaks volumes of what this institution is all about. Now, this accomplishment is due to the passion, to the commitment and the focus by the staff of SARS, by the leadership, to bring to life the higher purpose that I referred to earlier. In the words of the celebrated newspaper journalist, the late Agri-Cluster, the employees of SARS are truly nation builders. And I'd like you to see yourself as that you are nation builders. If there ever is a nation builder, that's what you are. Because with the rands and the cents that you collect and you encourage people to bring in, you are actually building South Africa. And what I like most is what I heard about the education for taxpayers, that we're educating more and more taxpayers and increasing the tax base and getting more and more of our people to pay tax. I once heard of a fable that our tax base is shrinking and shrinking, and the journalists did deep research and they got the information from yourselves, although they said they waited for quite a while, 6 months or so. In the end, she writes a piece, and her name is Claire Bessica. She says, she's found that no, rather than it shrinking, it's actually expanding, meaning that more and more South Africans are willing and coming forward to pay tax. So much as your work as the staff of SARS is to cajole, to encourage all of us to pay, South Africans are coming forward, and this is precisely what we should appreciate about South Africans. I have said on a number of occasions that we must do more to improve service delivery to our people, because our people deserve good service delivery. To root out corruption should be one of our key areas of focus, and to ensure that our economy does recover. Now, all these matters are being addressed with urgency and purpose, and because our people deserve the very best. To the SARS staff, you are our unsung heroes who have continued to carry out your patriotic tasks during trying times, such as during the global financial crisis. A number of you were still here in 2007, 2009. You worked through it, and you had a lot to do then. Our country's economic difficulties, you're working through that and trying all ways to find those rands and cents from taxpayers' pockets. The period of state capture was another period that was most testing for you all. And of course, COVID also presented you with other challenges. And these are some of the challenges that you have had to deal with yourselves. South Africa, therefore, owes you a debt of gratitude, and we should say Rea Leboha, for the work that you do. You are the unnoticed and unsung heroes. Sometimes you are not liked very much. And I should say that when we have to pay taxes, we don't like you very much. But we know we have to pay our taxes. We are also grateful for the assistance that SARS received in the formative years from other countries, from the Swedish Tax Authority, the Australian and Canadian revenue authorities, and many others that have assisted. It is like as we drafted our own constitution, we went around the world to see what other constitutions existed. And so we learned from them. And having learned from them, we do believe, and some people do say, that we produced one of the best constitutions in the world. And similarly, as they assisted us, we were able to build a revenue authority that has, as I said earlier, been seen to be one of the best in the world. Now, this assistance helped to accelerate the pace of learning for SARS during the early period. Unfortunately, none of these lessons could not have prepared SARS to protect itself against a well-orchestrated capture by self-serving individuals and some organizations who were not only unbothered by the higher purpose I spoke about, but were in fact hostile to it. So what we learned didn't teach us and arm us with a way in which we could protect our SARS when it was under attack. In 2018, I instituted the Commission of Inquiry headed by Judge Nugent to investigate the state of the revenue collector that had deteriorated. It had started going down from a world-class institution to one in which taxpayers and the public no longer had any trust. So this wonderful institution that had been built over the years had started going down, and we therefore had to need to have a closer look at what was happening. We saw an unfortunate decline in revenue performance in the years 2014 to 2018. It became clear to us that this important institution, this very valuable institution of our democracy, had been repurposed to serve the interests of corrupt and politically connected people. The most damning finding of the Nugent Commission was that there was a massive failure of governance and integrity here at SARS, facilitated by the deliberate dismantling of well put together and tried and tested organizational arrangements that supported the work of SARS. I undertook to implement all the recommendations that were made by the Nugent Commission of Inquiry. I know that the Ministry of Finance itself, the National Treasury, and SARS have implemented many of the Commission's recommendations. And through that whole process of implementing those recommendations, SARS is being rebuilt and it is regaining the stature that it used to occupy. The few that are outstanding will continue to receive the attention of my administration and the relevant institutions, and our commissioner here continues to implement many of those recommendations. And I do wish to thank Judge Nugent and his team, Professor Katz, and the outstanding evidence leader, Advocate Carol, who's here, for doing an excellent job in providing the recommendations that have assisted Commissioner Kiswetter and his team to restore not only the integrity, but also the standing, the trust worthy standing of SARS, to improve efficiency and to regain public trust amongst taxpayers, traders, and a number of other stakeholders. Now, for SARS to deliver optimally on its work, it is critical that all taxpayers and traders comply with their legal obligations, for we all have legal obligations as a people, because taxes are the lifeblood of a nation. And without it, the government becomes paralyzed, and the government would be nothing but an empty shell unless we pay our taxes. So for SARS to operate optimally, it is important that they get the cooperation of all of us. Over the past few years, SARS has been accessing data locally and across the world to help the organization to detect and act against non-compliant taxpayers and criminal syndicates. And before that capture moment, it had set up a creme de la creme system, and that was destroyed. And it has been rebuilt, and it is in rebuilt mode now, and it will be able to execute precisely what I've also said. To those compliant taxpayers who meet their legal obligations, I must say that we salute you as South Africans, because it is our duty as citizens to ensure that we continue paying our taxes and not dodge them. It is your compliance that enables SARS to fulfill its mandate of collecting all the revenue that is needed, because it is through this revenue that we are able to support the life of South Africans. The path of transformation of SARS to what it is today has been a long journey, and I do hope that any one of you seated here will be able to write the story of the modern SARS of 25 years. I do hope that you've already penned down a book of some sorts just to tell the story of the last 25 years. The organization went through many iterations, remodeling and operational shifts, and will continue to do so as a growing and maturing institution. And now we can say it is maturing very, very nicely, having shaken off the shackles of capture that had encircled it. From the early days of Siaka, which transformed SARS from an inwardly focused administrative orientation through to the first phase of technological modernization, we now have a SARS that aspires to be a smart, modern institution that is beyond reproach, which is trusted and which is admired by all. SARS is an excellent example of a government entity that is efficient and that is operating at the top of its game. And that we can credit to yourself as the leader of SARS here, and to your colleagues as well. The encouraging progress of rebuilding SARS is evidence that it is possible to arrest and rebuild ourselves from the deep damage we suffered during state capture. And there are a number of institutions which, having been captured, are in rebuild mode now. Some of that will take years, but we are really glad that this one, which is the real nerve center of the life of South African people, we have been able to rebuild and continue to do so. So I'd like to encourage SARS to continue in the vein and to inspire other government departments and entities to follow suit. And I'd like other government departments to come here. You suggested, someone suggested, it was the Deputy Minister who said, we should get the cabinet to come and meet in your Bridge Command Operation Center so that we can see as the full cabinet exactly what is possible to be built and created within a good budget administration process. I would like to bring my cabinet here to come and have a look. Because it just shows that it is possible to build an absolutely world-class institution. And I'd like to see as many of our government institutions, from the presidency right down as well, that we should know that we are capable as South Africans of excellence. We are good at it when we put our mind to it, and we can do it. What SARS has been able to achieve is a clear demonstration that it can be done. So I'm truly grateful that we have an institution like SARS, and that just not just exists for itself, but it exists for the people of South Africa and supports our life as South Africans. It is crucial that SARS continues to pursue its mandate also without fear or favor or prejudice, because you happen to stand at a position where sometimes what you do angers other people. And as I said, nobody ever wants to pay so much to give money to government. But at the same time, you're doing an essential job that has to be done. To you, Commissioner Kisvetter, and to more than 12,500 SARS staff members, I wish to thank you on behalf of all of us as South Africans for the work that you do. We are all proud of this institution that plays such an important role and a pivotal role in the life of our nation. And I'd like to say this is a happy moment, happy 25th anniversary to the South African Revenue Service. And we thank you also for having put yourself as an institution at a position where you are able to work so well with all other institutions. You work well with the National Prosecuting Agency, I know that. You work well with the Auditor General. You work well with a variety of other organizations, much as you are independent, but you also know that you are accountable to the various other institutions that operate in our country. You are a fine institution. Keep this institution as fine as it is. Happy 25th year anniversary. Thank you.